welcome to this week's programme. Well, over the last few weeks we've been tackling a lot of basics, but today we're going to be just a little bit more exotic and talk about spices. And I'm very lucky to have Michael Adler with me, who's a marketing manager of a very big company who exports spices all over the world. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct, Delia, yes.
And apparently spices have come on a lot recently, is that right?
In the past 10 years, spices have grown fantastically. They have become very, very popular. As people have travelled to Spain and Italy and France and had new flavours that have made their mouths water, they're very keen to have these things at home, and they can get them at home now in the Italian restaurants, pizza houses, curry houses and so on. So people's tastes are extended a great deal now.
And of course, you know, due to people like you, they're much more widely available.
Well, we have made them available, yes.
Now, just talking about a few of the spices we've got in front of us here, sometimes people are a bit confused about the differences. That first one there.
This is fresh ginger, which is available in certain, you can get them in special markets. It's not readily available, you have to hunt around for it. Now this is root ginger, which is much more readily available, but most people buy it ground, of course.
And that's the dried root ginger?
That's dried ginger, and
that's the one you have to bash a lot when you're making chutney to put in muslin.
Yes, sure. Another very popular spice, of course, is nutmeg.
My favourite.
And this has been a popular spice for thousands of years. And we usually sell most of it is ground, but if you want it really fresh, then you grate it yourself.
Yes, I'm trying to get people off the ground stuff and onto the freshly...
Yes, I gather you're pretty keen on that.
Yes.
Here again, nutmeg is a very interesting spice because it has two spices. Round the outside, I think you can see there, mace, which is the outer shell of the nutmeg.
And that has a more subtle flavour?
It has a much more subtle flavour than the nutmeg itself.
And you can use it ground, as we can see there.
Yes, yes.
That's nice in potted meat.
Beautiful. Now here again we have another popular spice, which is cinnamon, and this is the bark of a tree which is shaved off, and as you shave it off very finely, then it curls over and you get your cinnamon quills.
I see, that's why it curls.
Because it's shaved so thinly, and as it dries it just curls over.
Up.
Beautifully, yes.
That's fascinating. Now we're on to the fiery stuff.
Well, now chilies are hot, and if they've got two L's in the spelling, they are very hot. And these are chilies, and these are the crushed variety that are dried and crushed.
These are fresh ones?
These are fresh, yes.
And these, if they're crushed even more, become chili powder, the dried ones?
That's right. Now these are chilies again, whole and dried. They're from Japan, and they're very hot. And here we have cayenne pepper, which are ground chilies.
I see. Well, cayenne pepper's very fiery, isn't it? You have to be very sparing.
You have to just use a pinch at a time and be very careful with it.
Can you just explain the difference between cayenne pepper and chili powder?
Chili powder is a mixture of paprika and cayenne pepper, so that it's not as fiery.
Not quite as fiery.
No. And in the front here we have paprika, which is one of the most popular spices, used a great deal in Spain, and adds a great deal of colour to all cooking. It's a very mild flavour. Yes,
we're going to see that in a minute.
And last of all, here we have the most popular curry spices. We have cumin seed, coriander, and cardamom. Now, cardamom has a beautiful sweet fragrance. You can see the seeds just here, and they give a most marvellous fragrance to your curry powder.
You need very little, don't you?
They are rather expensive, but as you say, you need very little, and it makes all the difference.
Yes.
But you just use the seeds and not the outer pods.
And of course, the nice thing is the seeds are trapped inside, so the flavour's conserved.
Yes, with all the seeds, you really get the maximum flavour that you can expect from any of the herbs and spices.
Well, thank you, Michael, for coming along and explaining those things, and thank you for making all these spices available for us. Well, we've been around the world looking at spices. It's very interesting that one very important seasoning in cooking, which is salt, some of the finest salt in the world actually comes from Britain. So we're going to have a look at that now.
The small Essex town of Malden stands on the Blackwater estuary, some 10 miles from the sea. The reason why the water in this estuary has a higher saline content than any other in the country is due to the miles of mudflats and the low rainfall here. At each high tide, the mudflats are covered by seawater, which is concentrated by the drying action of the wind and sun. Each succeeding tide drains off this marsh water and carries it further up the estuary. Salt water is pumped out of the river into storage tanks and allowed to settle. The water is then filtered before the taps are turned on, and the 2 boiling pans are filled. These pans are heated from below by coal-fired furnaces. The water is brought to the boil for 15 minutes or so, and then the heat turned down to keep the water simmering, and then gentle evaporation begins. The salt crystals soon begin to form on the surface, and the temperature of the water and its salt content are carefully checked. The salt gradually sinks to the bottom of the pan, allowing new crystals to form. The pyramid shape of the crystals themselves are unique to the Maldon area and are almost pure chloride of sodium, and this is why this salt is less bitter tasting. When the pans have been allowed to cool, the salt is raked from the bottom to the sides and put into these tubs. Any excess water is then drained off, and the salt is taken to a storage room where it's thoroughly dried and ready for packing. As well as being sold in Britain, Maldon salt is exported to many parts of the world, including America, Australia and Scandinavia.
And of course it's sold to people like me who like to use it in the kitchen for lots of things. I think sprinkling crisp chips with crushed rock salt is really lovely. And also I use it for salad dressings because all in all it just has a much saltier flavour, but it's rather expensive, and so we've all got to use ordinary supermarket salt for a lot of cooking. And one tip I'd like to pass on here, and that is that cooking salt and table salt are one and the same. Cooking salt, in fact, has slightly coarser grains. So if you're spooning it onto the edge of your plate, it doesn't make any difference. You can use the same salt for cooking and eating and save yourself some money at the same time. Well, that's salt. Now the next important ingredient in cooking, one I'm very often teased about myself, and that is pepper. And there's a great story behind pepper because I think it's quite fascinating. Here I've got the unripened berries from a vine plant, which is how pepper begins. That's the berries, unripened, green, and you can buy those in little tins, preserved in brine, and you can use them in all sorts of recipes. Now, once they're ripened fully, they turn red, and then they're left to dry in the sun after harvesting, and they become whole black peppercorns. But we also have white peppercorns, and I'd like to explain the difference between white and black peppercorns. Black peppercorns are the whole berry. White peppercorns are just the inner centre berry, with the outer husk taken away. Now the outer husk, the black bit, has a lot of fragrance, and the inner berry, the white bit, has a lot of hotness. So if you use whole black peppercorns and you grind them freshly in a pepper mill, you have both the fragrance and the hotness. But if you use white peppercorns on their own, then you've just got hotness. And pepper, I think, should always be freshly ground because it does add a lot of flavour to food. Once it's ground, that sort of musty, dusty stuff, it really doesn't add anything to anything, I don't think. So that's whole black pepper. Now I'd like to show you a recipe using whole black pepper, and that's quite a popular one, steak au poivre. And for that, you need to crush peppercorns, not in a pepper mill, but in this very important piece of kitchen equipment, in my opinion, and that's a pestle and mortar. And what I'm going to do is I've got 2 teaspoons of peppercorns, and I've partly crushed them, and I'm just going to finish that off now, crushing them so that they're crushed coarsely. Once spices are ground, they do lose their flavour, as I've already mentioned. So a lot of spices can be stored and kept at home whole. And if you've got one of these instruments, a pestle and mortar, then you can grind them as and when you need them, and it makes their storage life longer. It's quite expensive. You need a birthday or Christmas to have one of these. But once you've got one, it'll last a lifetime. Now for steak au poivre, you start off with a shallow dish with 2 tablespoons of olive oil in the bottom. And then you need 2 steaks. This is going to serve 2 people. And these can be rump steaks or entrecôte steaks, sometimes called sirloin steak, or even fillet steak. And you start off by just coating them with oil. Then you use half the peppercorns to sprinkle over each steak, like this. Press them in and spread them out evenly. Then turn them over and sprinkle in the rest. Then you set them aside in a cool place with a piece of foil over them and leave them for several hours just to soak up all the lovely peppery flavours. And also the oil acts as a tenderiser for steak too, if you're a bit unsure of where the steaks come from. Well, now I'm going to commit one of the cardinal sins in cooking, and that is I'm going to show you a steak which has been cooked, or rather two steaks which have been cooked. And I say a cardinal sin because the fact is that you should never keep steak waiting. I just wanted to save you the boredom of seeing a steak cooking from start to finish. But what I did was I got the pan really hot, hot as you dare, put a little bit of the oil in, and then seared the steaks on both sides. And for 8-ounce steaks, you need to have, you need to give them about 3 minutes on each side for medium, but you can adjust that according to how you like it. I think the secret is, to have the pan really hot. And I like to fry steaks because I find frying them, you conserve all the juices that come out of them in the pan. And so I've got the juices here that have come out of the meat. And what I want to show you now is how to deglaze a pan. About a minute before the end of the cooking time, you pour in some red wine. If you're having wine with the meal, then you can just sneak a bit out of the bottle. And red wine's very nice with steak. And then you just use that to rinse the pan out and conserve all the juices to make just a little bit of sauce to serve with the steaks. Let it bubble and cook until it becomes really syrupy. Just let it all evaporate, and then the flavour of the wine becomes concentrated with the meat juices. And then I think you should have warm plates ready on the table, and then take the steaks to the table and serve them from the frying pan. Serve them from the frying pan straight onto the plates. And then you can just spoon some of those lovely reduced juices over. We've got a few escaped peppercorns there, and that should really be quite delicious. Garnish it with some watercress, serve it with some sauté potatoes and sprinkle some salt on, and perhaps a nice crisp green salad would be very good with that. Well, that's steak au poivre. Now we're going to move on to something really spicy, and that's an authentic Indian curry. This is called beef curry with whole spices, and I started off, not quite authentically, I cheated a little bit, with 1.5 pounds of chuck steak, and these have been browned in ground nut oil. If it was really authentic, I'd have used ghee, which is clarified butter, but to save time, I've used ground nut oil. So that's put on one side. Here, in my casserole, I've got 2 onions which have been browning in the juices left by the meat, and I'm just going to bring those up to heat now while I show you the whole spices. Well, I'm switching to another pestle and mortar here because whole spices are going to be crushed the same way as we did the peppercorns. First of all, 2 teaspoons of coriander seeds. And then I've got 1 teaspoon of cumin seeds. In India, they crush them with a big granite stone and a sort of granite-looking rolling pin, which always amuses me and always looks quite complicated, but this is quite easy. Now I've got 2 cardamom pods, and I'm just going to put those in whole, and the seeds will come out when I start to crush them. Just turn my heat down a bit now, because it's getting rather hot. Just use circular movements or backwards and forwards and just crush the spices down. And the lovely thing about making a curry with whole spices is once you start to grind them, you begin to get that beautiful aromatic aroma. Now, to draw out the real flavour of the spices, they need heat. So the next thing you do is you put them in with the onions and stir them around and let the heat draw out all those beautiful flavours. It's at this stage you start to get incredibly hungry. Cooking a curry always gives you twice the appetite, I think, of anything else. Now I've got some more flavourings to go in. First of all, I've got some fresh root ginger, which we saw earlier. This has been grated. It's about 1.5 inches, and it's been finely grated, or you can chop it if you like. And if you can't get fresh root ginger, then just use powdered ginger instead, about 2 teaspoons. Then I've got what gives curry flavour, and this is ground turmeric. Sorry, I meant to say colour, as you can see. This is ground turmeric, and you can also use this in cooking rice to give it a lovely yellow flavour, which is more economical than saffron. And also, turmeric is related to the ginger family. It does have a lovely flavour too. Now I've got one more spice. I'll just pop that off the heat for a minute to show you. In fact, 2 more, but the first one is garlic. Now garlic isn't really a spice, it's a herb, but it's classed with spices, and certainly it's an important ingredient in curries. You get a head of garlic, lots of cloves together, and you separate them out. And this recipe, in fact, needs to have 2 cloves of garlic crushed. Now I've crushed one, so I'm just going to take the papery skin off this one and then just show you one way of crushing it. You can buy garlic presses in the shops that will press it for you, but I find that it takes so long to unclog them that they're really not worth the time saved. Put the blade of a knife on the garlic clove and then just press it down like that. Or you can put the garlic clove in a pestle and mortar, and you can crush it with a little bit of salt, because the salt draws the juice out. This is quite a handy little knife, by the way. This is actually called a tomato knife because it's got a serrated edge. But I find it useful for all sorts of things in the kitchen, and one of them crushing garlic. Well, now I'm going to put that back on the heat, put the garlic in, and then I've got one more ingredient here, and that's fresh chilli. We saw fresh chilli earlier on. These are 2 fresh chilies which have had the hot seeds taken out of them, and they've been chopped very, very finely. Again, if you can't get fresh chilies, then you can use, for this recipe, 1/2 teaspoon of chili powder. 1/2 teaspoon, no more than 1/2 teaspoon, because it is very fiery. So now I've got the chili in. The next thing I'm going to do is to return the meat to the pan with all the juices. Just stir it around to get it coated with all those lovely spices. Now the liquid I'm going to use, first of all, is just plain old water. 2 fluid ounces of water, first of all. Perfectly permissible for a curry. And then the other liquid is this, which is 1/4 pint of natural yoghurt. Now, if you're the sort of person who doesn't like eating yoghurt normally, fear not, because once it's had long, slow cooking, 2 hours, it doesn't taste like yoghurt tastes in the beginning at all. It does give the sauce a really delicious and very authentic Indian flavour. I once tried this out on somebody who doesn't normally eat yoghurt, and I found that they didn't recognise the yoghurt at the end of the cooking. Now what you want to do with that is, it's nice this because it's all made in one pot, which doesn't leave you much washing up to do. You then put a lid on there and you simmer it very, very slowly, the lowest heat possible, for 2 hours. Just simmer it for 2 hours, and then it'll be ready. And if you find a lot of juices have come out after 2 hours, you can take the lid off and just cook it a bit more to reduce the sauce and thicken it slightly, if you think you need to. Well, that's a fairly authentic beef curry. I'd serve that with some spiced pilau rice, and I think some mango chutney would be very nice with it too. Now the recipe for that and all the spice recipes are contained in the book that goes with the series, Well, that's a recipe using whole spices. Now I'd like to show you a recipe using a ground spice, and the ground spice in question is paprika, which has the flavour of dried green peppers or red peppers. And the recipe I want to show you is called chicken paprika, and I started off with a chicken, 3.5 pounds, cut into 4, and these have been browned nicely to give a good golden crust. Then the next thing I did was take 2 medium onions and brown them in the oil left in the pan, and I've got those ready browned here. One thing I'd like to say about paprika, and that is it does lose its flavour quite quickly, so it's one spice not to have hanging around in the larder for too long. Now once you've browned the onions, the next thing you do is you add a tablespoonful of flour to the pan, plus a tablespoonful of paprika, nice heaped tablespoon, and then a couple of pinches of cayenne pepper just to give it a little zest. Then you stir those spices into the juices that have come out of the chicken and onions, and as soon as the dryness has gone out of it, you then add 1/4 pint of chicken stock. Now this has been made with the giblets of the chicken. If you didn't get giblets with your chicken, then you can just use 1/4 pint of hot water with a teaspoonful of tomato puree to enrich it instead of the chicken stock. But chicken stock made from the giblets is the best thing to use. So stir that in, and then the next ingredient is the contents of a 14-ounce tin of Italian tomatoes. Right, there's the sauce coming along nicely. The next thing I'm going to do is to put the chicken pieces in with the sauce, like that, and then you just spoon the sauce over the chicken pieces and then put a lid on, and you put it in the oven, a preheated oven, gas mark 3, that's 325 degrees Fahrenheit, and you cook it for 45 minutes like that. And then you add one other ingredient. You take the lid off and you add this, which is 1 green pepper, peeled and chopped. So after 45 minutes, in goes the green pepper, lid back on, and then give it another half an hour at the same temperature. And then you add something else to it to make a really delicious sauce, and I've got one in the oven now, so I'll show you how to do that. I've left my heat on because I want to put it over direct heat, if possible, while I finish off. And the last thing is 1/4 pint of soured cream, which is what they use in Hungary quite a lot for cooking. And what you do is you just stir in the soured cream. I'm going to switch to a larger spoon here, and just let it have a nice marbled effect. Spoon it over each piece of chicken, so you've got that lovely sort of red and white marbled effect. And then before it goes to the table, just sprinkle on a little bit more paprika, just to make it look pretty. And I would serve that with some buttered noodles. Rice would be nice too, but buttered noodles too. Well, that's all about spices. Next time, we're going to take a look at winter vegetables and have a few tips on growing for flavour as well from an expert. So do come back and join me then. Bye-bye.